Okay, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. A big welcome to all of you who are here on the live stream, but also to all of you that will be watching on YouTube or Rumble. Welcome to the river. And we wish you are having a blessed and fruitful Shabbat, wherever you are, scattered on this earth. For the age to come, part 6, we've made it to the final part. We're going to wrap up the book of 1 Timothy today. And what a journey it's been. What a journey. It's been convicting, joyful. It's difficult to have a mirror put in front of your face to realize what you're not. But also with that, I hope that this series has served as actually as a means of giving joy and peace, where despite that we're not a finished product, hopefully we can see where we have grown in our lives to the glory of Yah, because he is working in our midst. I will say that unapologetically. I see the evidence of Yah working in our midst in this community, and it's actually very reassuring that despite our shortcomings, we are growing. We are becoming a people. We're learning what it means to be the house of Israel. And so today, as we conclude the series, we're going to kind of bring it back to the correct perspective. Why would the Apostle Paul go through the first 5 chapters of Timothy, and what is the point of all of this? And the title of today's teaching really kind of sums it up, that all of what we're learning, everything that we're doing really is for the age to come. It's not for this life. The wisdom we learn is not the wisdom of this age, but of the age to come. And we're also just going to, at the end of today's teaching, we're going to basically take a bird's eye view of the whole book of First Timothy in terms of its literary structure, because you know, when we go through a book like this, chapter by chapter, week by week, sometimes it's easy to forget like the bird's eye view and the general narrative and the thread that's running through the whole book. Because, you know, every week we're isolating and zoning in onto one chapter. So today we're going to kind of zoom out once we've gone through chapter 6 and just kind of put it back into perspective. But before we do so, let's quickly recap on part 5. We looked at basically part 5 was how we are to act as a body. And we saw that Paul said, you know, do not rebuke an older man or an older woman, rather encourage them. But when you look at the Greek words for that, you know, we see that biblical encouragement still has reproof found within it. And essentially what Paul was saying, it was, don't cut your brother down for the sake of it. Don't just come in and, you know, smash them over the head with a proverbial Torah scroll. You know, Curtis and I, we had a little joke, a little laugh at Sukkot this year. And, you know, we were talking about seagull servant leadership or seagull servitude. And what we meant by that is where people kind of swoop in, make a mess over everything and just fly right back out like seagulls do. And that's not what we want to be. We don't want to be seagull servants. You know, so this idea of not coming in and just cutting everybody down, we're actually to come in, we're to encourage, we're to exhort, but with biblical encouragement, there is an element of accountability and hence reproof. And so let's do things meekly and in love with all patience, whilst looking at ourselves in the mirror and knowing where we fall short. We saw, you know, various instructions regarding dealing with widows. And we saw that there were true widows, essentially, you know, women who were widowed but had no means to look after themselves. And then there were also widows that were fortunate and could look after themselves, and that, you know, those that could look after themselves should look to serving their own family first. And the reason for this was so that the assembly was not unnecessarily burdened, because just because you're a widow does not mean that now, the assembly should serve you in every physical means possible, because there are widows out there that can look after themselves. They have been blessed and allowed to enjoy the fruit of their toil. And so those that can look after themselves should look to serve their own family units so that the family unit is strengthened, and thus allowing the assembly to look after the widows that truly can't look after themselves, those that are less fortunate. We saw that being rich or not rich is not the issue that we focus on. It's the issue really was where your heart was at. Some people can deal with being rich physically rather well, others cannot. It destroys them. And so again, the issue is not physical possessions or luxury or any of those things. It's do your physical possessions own you as opposed to you owning them? Because as Yeshua says, where your heart is, what you focus on, that's where your heart will be. And are we focused on earthly things or are we focused on heavenly things? And as we're going to see today, everything that we're going through is so that we can learn the wisdom that is for the age to come. Providing for one's family shows that we fear Elohim. If we fear Yah, we'll obey his command that we're to provide one for the other. And so, yes, there's providing on a physical level, but we saw that there's also provision on an emotional level and even on a spiritual level. So to look at the men's side of things, yes, that you are to provide for your family, to give them a safe place to live, a house, to provide physically for your children. But are you nurturing your wife and your children on the emotional level so that they can grow emotionally to a mature place? And are you taking your headship seriously so as to provide that spiritual nourishment to your family? And then this, let's flip it now to the woman's side. On a physical level, ladies, are you being a helpmeet to your husbands? On the emotional side, are you that safe space that your husband can go to fully open himself up and deal with the emotional struggles that he may have? And spiritually, are you helping raise your children and on children in the way? There's a physical, an emotional, and a spiritual level to providing for your own family. However, there was a warning that came with that those that do not provide for their own, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, are actually worse than the unbeliever, and they have denied the faith. And that this applies to both men and women. No one is off the hook here. Like, we're all equal in Messiah's eyes. Both men and women have their toil and their duties given to them by their Creator while we're here in this time domain. And so, are we people of the faith? Are we of the house of Israel? Because if we are going to be providing for our families physically, emotionally, spiritually. And that's just on the family level. But let's remember that on a spiritual level, we are the household of Elohim. In the weightier picture, there's a groom, there's a bride, there's going to be spiritual children. And so in the spiritual picture, we're the woman. Are we providing physical, emotional, and spiritual nourishment for the spiritual babes of the faith? And when you take this analogy at the weightier level, there's a really interesting line that what's the role of a woman to her husband? And how does that apply in the spiritual shadow picture? In the spiritual weightier matter. Wives, physically, in this shadow picture, time domain, are you providing that emotional support for your groom? What is the weightier picture of that? And I've said in teachings in the past that love is a two-way stream. Trust is a two-way stream. Do we trust him? Do we love him? But that goes the other way. Does he love us? Does he trust us? And so I think there's a beautiful mystery of scripture right there when you ponder the design of men and women at the family level and then apply it to the bride and the groom at the spiritual level. Are we providing that space for our King to share his heart with us? Beautiful thought there. Providing for our own families, both men and women, physically, emotionally, spiritually, is actually part of our toil in this time domain. And by now, it should be evident, that the toil is there for our benefit. As Yah said in the garden, cursed is the ground for your sake, Adam. This is going to help you with your fallen state. And for the women, it was to do with the raising of the children, the raising of a household. And so that was the woman's toil. And that is for her sake. Hence why Paul would say that the woman shall be saved through childbearing. This is our allotted toil. This is actually a gift from our groom to help us refine our characters, our hearts, to help with the sanctification process. And so if we're going to shirk our toil, we may as well be throwing the groom's gift back in his face. And, it takes a little adjustment, to understand that toil is for our spiritual benefit, and thus illustrating, that his ways truly are not our ways. We saw that not toiling leads to being a busybody, the usurping of others, and not overcoming. Now, the example that Paul gave was on the woman's side, but this applies just as much to the men. Ladies, how attractive is a man that is not willing to look after himself and not work? It wears very thin, doesn't it? You think, oh, no, you're still a boy. And so it illustrates, why would you think that way? Because I believe it's literally baked into the time domain that we are to toil. It's for our benefit. And when we don't do that, well, then all manner of issues start to surface. Wonder not why when people do not work and do not provide physically, emotionally, and spiritually, depression starts to set in, a lack of self-worth, and I mean that in the positive sense, because there's nothing wrong with being proud of the toil that you have done, to the glory of Yah. And so not toiling, rejecting this gift from the groom will inevitably breed bad fruit. However, toiling is difficult. It wouldn't be toil if it wasn't. It wouldn't be by the sweat of our brow if it wasn't toil, which means that sometimes we struggle. And as we approach the end of the age, we've inherited so many lies from our fathers and from our cultures and from our modern Western society that some people genuinely struggle with going about their toil, and let alone struggling, but they don't even know how to go about it. This is truly the state that we've gotten to in this modern day as we approach the end of the age. There's people that do not have the physical, emotional, and spiritual fortitude to even look at their toil, let alone start toiling. And do we now look down on these people and leave them in the dirt? No. Those of us that are stronger in the faith are to bear with the failings of those who are weaker in the faith. And so we're to help one another with our toil. However, there's a caveat to this. We're not to do it at the cost of their equipping. So yes, we're to help a brother or sister in need. Yes, we're to help them learn the tools to be able to go about their toil, but we're not to do everything for them. Again, we're not here to fix people. He's in the business of fixing people if people turn themselves to him. But what we are to do is to help one another, to turn ourselves to him, to go about our toil. And so I guess this is summed up in the modern day proverb, teach a man how to fish as opposed to giving him a fish. Now apply that to helping one another in discipleship with our toil. We're not here to do everything for people, and we're not here to do their toil for them. We're to help them, equip them so that they can do it for themselves. Because again, I can't circumcise your heart. I can't sanctify you, and we can't do that to each other, but we can certainly help each other in the process. Younger widows are to remarry, but not for the wrong reasons, i.e., to avoid their own toil. You know, we saw that Paul was saying some widows remarry and then they end up becoming busybodies. It's because they're not doing their toil at home in the raising of the household. So, you know, Paul is encouraging the younger widows to remarry, but not at the expense of their toil. Why? Because it is through our toil that character will be refined, that hearts will be circumcised. And so the issue is not remarriage or staying single. The issue is why, and how are you going to go about it, and what are you going to do with it? We saw the elders that actually persist in sin, not stumble, but persist. There's a difference. They're to be rebuked at the eldership level. You know, the dignified way of going about reproof is not airing everyone's dirty laundry at the congregational level. And there's many reasons for that. Mainly that if that person that's been rebuked actually comes to repentance, it means they have an easier time coming back in. But again, there's a way of going about rebuke, reproof, and it's not to be made a show of. We don't want to be a community that generates Lashon Hara and evil speech. Authority structure in the body of Messiah has always been the same. We saw this little diagram, there was the Jerusalem Council and various apostles underneath them, and then Paul would be in that level. Then there was Timothy, there was Titus, then there were assemblies. This structure perfectly mirrors what was going on in the wilderness, you know, with Moshe, Aaron, the 70 elders, and then the leaders of thousands and hundreds and 50s and 10s and so forth. And do not be surprised that this is exactly going to be the eldership structure in the age to come, where we have Messiah, the 24 elders, a bridal governance, and so forth. Authority structure in the body of Messiah has always been the same. He changes not. And we finished with this question: did Timothy experience physical stress symptoms from laying hands on some too early? And so we have to understand this is why the instructions in the book of 1 Timothy and really in all of Scripture have been given to us, that if we go things about his way, it may be difficult in the flesh, but in the long run, it will give you shalom. And, you know, do we see evidence that Timothy made some mistakes along the way and paid the price because of it? I know that I have, and this is why I put this thought forward. So let's conclude this series with chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 1. Let all who are under a yoke as bondservants regard their own masters as worthy of all honor, so that the name of Elohim and the teaching may not be reviled. The modern way of illustrating this is that some of you are employed. You have bosses, you have authorities above you. And Paul is saying, if you are under a yoke of bond servanthood, or let's use the modern lingo of employment, you're to regard your masters worthy of all honor. Why? So that the name of Elohim and the teaching may not be reviled. You know, unfortunately, I see many people in the body of Messiah treat their Roman or unbelieving bosses like garbage. And their bosses and their colleagues will know that this person is some kind of faith. What kind of witness does that give to those that they're working with? Oh, you're a believer in the Bible. Oh, so this is what a Bible believer acts like. And so, again, like, not only is this a matter of witness, but to paraphrase the book of 1 John, in 1 John it says, if you can't love your brother in the flesh who you can see, how are you going to love your brother, Elohim, in the spirit who you cannot see. How we deal with one another is a barometer of how we're going to deal with Elohim. And so if we can't even deal at the basic shadow picture level with authority structure, even in this Roman unbelieving world, how are we going to respect authority at the weightier matter? You know, I see so many people saying, oh, yes, I serve Yeshua, I serve Messiah, and yet they can't even hold down a job because of their lousy attitude. Or they're so emotionally inept and ill-equipped that they cannot deal with any form of authority. Like authority will say, can you do this? Can you do that? And they can't do it without getting, offended. And it's like, is this what we've become? Paul goes on to say, those who have believing masters must not be disrespectful on the ground that they are brothers. Rather, they must serve all the better, since those who benefit by their good service and believers are believers and beloved. And so not only are you to respect your unbelieving authorities or employers, but if your employer or authority above you is that of the faith, you actually need to go above and beyond. You need to go above and beyond as even you would a Roman employer. And you see these precepts actually found in the Torah. In the Torah, it says that, masters who have a believing bondservant are actually to treat them with the utmost respect. And the same is true in the converse. If you have a master or an employer or an authority that is of the faith, you need to serve them as if they are the master. And so I've put this note here. The modern Western attitude towards friends within the body is diametrically opposed to what is found in the scripture. What do I mean by this? I have brothers and close friends in the faith that run businesses. And unfortunately, the state of the body is so bad that these friends and brothers of mine, and I will not employ someone that calls themselves a Torah believer. Why, do you say? It's because of all the bad fruit that they've had from employees who profess the faith. These employees will go on to, frankly, just take the mick. They take the boss for granted. They usurp them. They go, oh, well, we're all one in Messiah. We're brothers in the faith, and use that as an excuse to usurp and cause all kinds of bad fruit within a business. And then what would happen is that the other non-believing employees then get infected by the behavior of the so-called believing employees. I mean, really think about this, that there are employers right now, probably tuning in right now, that will not employ someone that professes the faith because of how much bad fruit they've inherited over the time. This is terrible, absolutely terrible. On top of that, in the Western mindset, there's this attitude that if you have a friend who runs a business, we've got this phrase in the UK saying, oh, can you give me mates rates? And what we mean by that is, because I know you, can you do me a special deal? And actually, that is diametrically opposed to what the Torah says. The Torah says, to employers, to the employees, if they leave, you will richly supply them with goods. You will richly supply them so that they can go on and set themselves up. But the same is expected of employees. You will serve your masters as though you're serving the master himself. You will go above and beyond. And so, again, we bring this attitude in. Like I hear stories of employers and tradesmen within the faith that have done jobs for other people in the body. And those people in the body will say, oh, well, we're brothers. And they won't, in some cases, won't even pay them. Won't even pay them. It's hard enough to make a living in a world where everything is going down the plug hole. And we should be helping one another actually have a decent living. If I buy a product or a service from a brother in the faith, I will pay them full price and then maybe some on top of that. Like, again, this Western attitude of, can I have mates rates? Can I have a special rate? It is not biblical. You know, we're supposed to be a light, and like, again, it's difficult enough to compete with big businesses out there and to try and scrape a living together, as, you know, living standards are plummeting and inflation is going through the roof. And then you're going to undercut your brother in the name of Yeshua? It's horrendous. It's so bad. And so when I hear these testimonies, it's grieving. If a brother is doing a job for you, you want him to succeed. Pay him. Pay him full price. And if he decides to give you to cut some of the price, then fine. But that's his choice. But again, like what Curtis and I hear in the body going on regarding employment and services is shocking. And guess what? Because of that, the name of Elohim and the teaching is being reviled. Reviled. It's got to the point where believing employers would rather employ unbelievers. That's the true state and shocking state of the body right now. Let it not be found in our midst. Let us help build one another up and actually do what we can, even in the physical time domain, to help each other. You know, it reminds me of the passage in the book of Yaakov, James, where he's saying, if you say to your brother, be warm and be filled, but you do not give him the bodily needs, your faith is dead. Your faith is dead. Rather, if you have the ability to help someone physically, you should do so. This is the way that your faith is being perfected. And so I hope my point is coming across very clear. You know, you've got to think that in the time of Paul, believers were being persecuted. When you understand how trade happened in the Roman Empire, and that you usually had to be part of a guild, and to be part of a guild, you usually had to partake of pagan ceremonies to do so. It was very tough in the Roman Empire to make a good business while being a believer. Just by professing the faith, you could have your business completely stripped from you. And so it's not. We're getting to a similar place now with all the Roman bondage and red tape that is occurring. So I guess what Paul is saying, what I'm trying to say is, stop trying to undercut your brother. Stop being a hypocrite. You should want your brother to succeed, because the more they succeed, the more people are blessed within the body. Let's be a light. Let's not drag the name of Elohim and his teaching through the mud. If anyone teaches a different doctrine and does not agree with the sound words of our Master Yeshua Messiah and the teaching that accords with godliness or reverence, right? Reverence, the fear of Yah. Now, we've seen this statement come up a few times now throughout this book of 1 Timothy. Watch out for those that will bring in destructive doctrines or that will try and teach differently. Think about Paul repeating this statement right off the heels of this, about how we deal with, in modern speech, employers. Why would he? This is one of the biggest witnesses that we give to the world around us, how we compose ourselves, how we hold ourselves in our employment and our work lives. You know, look. You work the majority of the day. You should be toiling the majority of your day. You should be, because it's for your own benefit. And so this is actually the most hours you give to any one thing in the day, generally speaking, if you hold full-time employment, which means that this is the biggest source of your witness. And so Paul is then saying, watch out for anyone that teaches differently. So to those of you that will come in and say, oh, can I have mates rates? Or I know I said I'd pay you the full price, but really I can't really pay you, like not fully. Like really? Paul is saying, watch out for these people. He says, look what he says about them. They are puffed up with conceit, pride. They understand nothing. That means they do not understand their faith. It's actually one of the ways that you deny the faith, right? You claim to love him. You claim to fear him. You claim to be a follower of Messiah, but yet you're cheating your brother the whole time. You're undercutting him with wages or with paying him for his goods and services. Like, do you not fear Yah? Notice, like, that if they teach differently in according with reverence. Again, if you can't love your brother, you can't love Yah. If you cannot fear, so if you fear Yah or claim to, you will respect and fear your brother, especially when it comes to matters of business. He has an unhealthy craving for controversy, so causing strife and division, and for quarrels about words. When I looked into the Greek of this, because the English translation kind of piqued my interest, and I looked at the Greek word for this. It's actually a compound word, which literally means word quarrels. That's like, I forget what the word for quarrel is, but the word for word is logos, and it's literally word quarrels. Think about how this is manifested in the modern day, especially in the Messianic Hebrew roots movement, people having huge arguments over the meaning of Greek this or Hebrew that. I find it really interesting. And going back to the unfortunate testimony I was giving earlier, of these believing employers not wanting to employ believers, it's funny that a lot of their characteristics perfectly matched this. They caused controversy within not only the employer's business, but also within the places they were fellowshipping or on social media. They love to quarrel and split hairs over words. And all of this, it causes envy, dissension, slander, evil suspicions. Again, and remember, the context of this is how we deal with employment or bondservants in the ancient term. Constant friction among people who are depraved in mind and deprived of the truth, imagining that godliness or the fear of Yah is a means of gain. And so this is, in this context, is perfectly demonstrated, again, a believer who's not willing to pay another brother or sister in the faith for their services, it actually shows that they do not fear Yah. And they're using the faith, we're brothers or sisters in the faith, as a means of gain. Gains by undercutting your brother and keeping back a few dollars? I mean, seriously? If you come across someone like that, Paul is essentially saying, have nothing to do with them, because if not, you're going to bring into your life controversy, quarrels, dissension, slander, friction. And if you have these things constantly going on in your life, it will spread, you will lose your shalom, and then you may even come to a place where you're experiencing physical stress symptoms because you're entertaining all this stuff. But ultimately, who do these people not fear? They do not fear Yah. They will claim the faith. They have all the understanding on the words in the Greek and the Hebrew, but they're actually deprived of the truth. They've missed the goal concerning truth, as we covered in part 1 of the teaching. These people that have arguments over the Torah but miss the goal, which is Messiah. And walking out our faith in peace, in meekness, and having the fruit thereof, because we're toiling. Toiling is difficult enough. Don't undercut your brother in his toil. But godliness or fear, remember this, the word there is eusebia in the Greek. It's a reverential fear. Fear or godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. And so look at the contrast that Paul is doing. In this chapter, he's saying that the people that teach differently, especially how we interact with one another within a business sense, or just being a body, These people, they think that godliness is a means of gain. They will, because they do not fear Yah, they will cut their brother behind. They'll pocket some extra money in this example. And Paul is saying, what's the point? Because you're not bringing those extra dollars out of the world. It's all temporary. We cannot take anything out of the world. So you're going to cut your brother down or sister. You're going to drag the name of Elohim and the teaching through the mud for something that literally is of no eternal value. This is really the crux of it. However, if we have food and clothing with these, we will be content. It's interesting, food and clothing. Why? I believe this takes us right back to the garden. How are we to eat bread? By the sweat of our brow. Toil. This is how we have food. How do you make clothes? Right? You're like, well, you've got to, in ancient times, you had to spin the yarn. You had to turn it into textile and all this stuff. And if you weren't the clothes maker yourself, you would have to toil to earn money to go to a merchant to buy clothes. And so food and clothing, I believe, point to toil. I've put here the effect of this will go into the next stage. Because again, what is toil there for? It's there to help us with our fallen state, but it's actually there to, I'm just going to come flat out and say it, it's there to help us prepare our garments. It's there to help us refine our hearts and to undergo sanctification and heart circumcision. And so this is what Paul is saying, like, guys, none of this stuff you can take out of the world. But if we have food and clothing because we've toiled for it, with these we will be content. Why? Because the effect of toil will exit the time domain. You know, people have this idea that when they get their glorified body, all of a sudden, whoosh, they're going to get a circumcised heart. It's my firm belief that the amount of heart circumcision you undergo now in this time domain is the amount of heart circumcision you will have in the age to come. Will your heart continue to be circumcised in the age to come? Yeah, I do believe so, because even in the resurrected body, the bridal governance of Messiah will be toiling in governing the nations. But be under no illusion that where your heart will be when you exit the time domain, that's what you're taking out of it. There's not going to be this magic whoosh where your heart is now magically circumcised. Now, granted, in a resurrected body, you will no longer be subject to the flesh. So there's a lot of hostile jamming from the flesh that you're no longer going to have to contend with. But whatever heart circumcision is occurring now, that's what you're taking out. So make the most of it. Quit being lazy. Do your toil. Because remember, there's a judgment. And we'll read this later on, that what we do now, if we have the right focus and we're eternally minded, we can actually be building ourselves a good foundation for the age to come. So as temporary this time domain is, it is of great value. Why? Because of toil. This is why it's so critical that we understand the nature of toil and want to know more why the enemy has gone to great lengths to basically emotionally damage people so much that they can't even deal with the smallest amount of toil and authority. He's literally created people people are suffering so much EAD that they actually don't know how to deal with toil. And because of this, then their hearts are not being refined. It's actually wicked. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Now, let's remember what we covered last week. The issue is not riches. The issue is that where your heart is at? And so this is why Paul is saying those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, right? He's just said, we've just read that we're not taking any of this out the time domain. You can undercut your brother or sister financially or physically all you want, but it matters not because none of it's coming out. The only thing that's coming out is the effect of your toiling on your heart. And so what is your desire? By the way, let's not use this either for, oh, well, it's all temporary, therefore I'm not going to work, because none of it matters. Like, no. You don't get to go too far the other way either. I've seen people in the faith do this. They go, oh, well, it's all temporary. It doesn't matter. And they'll do that. The real reason is so that they don't have to toil. Look, life is difficult enough as it is in this time domain. You know, there's nothing wrong with enjoying the fruit of our labor. Solomon would even say in Ecclesiastes that blessed is the man that Yah has allowed to enjoy the fruit of his labor. It does make this time domain a little easier to digest, so to speak. But let's not get the horse before the cart. What is the goal? Who is the goal? Right? Seek first the kingdom and its righteousness, and then all these things shall be added unto you. And if you've managed to do well for yourself in this time domain, power to you, kudos to you. But let it not be at the expense of your faith. So the issue is not riches, it's the desire of the heart here. And I've put here, what do you long and yearn for? Because mark my words, all of us have something inside of us that we long and yearn for. And a lot of us have spent most of our unbelieving or religious lives trying to fill that void. The only thing that's going to fill that void is Him. And I would argue that it's Him when we exit the time domain. In Ecclesiastes, there's this really interesting statement that I'll paraphrase it, that Elohim has put eternity in man's heart, and that when not dealt with properly, it can actually turn men to madness. And so people have this void inside of them, and they try to fill it with, or distract themselves with riches or worldly pursuit or sports or music or drugs, alcohol, pharmakia, anything to distract you from this void that's inside of you. The only way you're going to fill it is to do what you were designed to do. And that is to work, that is to seek and worship Elohim and to toil. Look, why do you think that when you toil or you do a job and you know you've done a good job and you stand back and you look at it and you go, wow, why do you think that is? I believe Yah's literally baked it into the time domain. You will learn the principles. If you toil, you will be blessed. If you toil and do what Yah has asked of you, you will feel satisfaction at the soul and heart level. And so again, this is why that people who shirk their toil or shirk their faith or have a religious faith as opposed to a biblical faith, actually they have no peace because that void is not being filled. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils, not money itself, the love of it. Again, what do you long and yearn for? Who's your idol? What's your idol? It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. And so look at the language being used: desires, senseless and harmful desires, love, craving. And all of this is in the context of what is temporary and what is eternal. That's the context of this. Now, it says that people that focus on these things have wandered away from the faith. Do you honestly think that Paul is saying that these people have completely forgotten what is written in the Bible and they've completely forgotten who Elohim is? Maybe on the extremities, on the edges of the bell curve, so to speak, maybe. But generally, this is actually, I believe, Paul referencing what Torah says, wandering to the left and to the right. What does Yah say? Follow the narrow path. Stay on the way. Stay on the path, the way, the derech, right? And he says, do not wander to the left or to the right. And so, essentially, these are people that are distracting themselves from the faith. Look, I know people in the true faith that regret having distracted themselves with temporary time domain ventures, shall we say. They've spent so much time in their career or their desires at the expense of their faith, yet they're in the true faith. I believe this is what's going on here. And I've got here as part of the note, mental assent versus true faith. Again, do we honor him with our lips and keep our hearts far from him? Or are we going about the business of tilling the ground, toiling, and serving one another? But as for you, O man of Elohim, flee these things. What things? These temporary desires, because they're fleeting. He says, pursue righteousness, godliness, the fear of Yah, faith, love, steadfastness or faithfulness, gentleness. Guess what? All of these things will come out of the time domain. If your heart, again, what is coming out of this time domain? Fight the good fight of the faith, i.e., do your toil. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called and about which you made the good confession in the presence of many witnesses. Paul is saying, he's putting it back into sharp focus. This is not life. Life is yet to come. Therefore, in this test, pursue the things that actually matter on the eternal level. If you have a righteous or reverential heart, a heart that is steadfast and faithful, a heart that is gentle, that has love, that is coming out. Your character is coming out of the time domain. As I said, what heart circumcision you undergo now is probably the only thing that's coming out of this time domain. And so I've put here, the time domain will expose what or who you desire and love. If you have the love of money, the love of consumerism, the love of religion, the love of tradition, yeah, this time domain will expose it. But if you desire righteousness, godliness, faith, love, that will expose it too. And so then this goes back into part of the reason for the time domain. Yah will select a bride out of this time domain. What do you think he's looking for? A bride that is eternally focused, that actually pursues and loves the things that will transcend this time domain. And so why, again, this should put into sharp focus, why do we serve one another? Is it just because the Bible says so? Or Curtis and Michael go on about it every week and we should probably do something? Do you serve one another so you can get compliments for thank you for helping? Or do you serve one another because you realize there's an eternal perspective, that there's going to be a judgment, that we're to help each other through our toil? Like literally, when we help each other through our toil, we're helping each other chase that which is eternal. We're helping each other have a better judgment day, because through our toil, our hearts are refined. And the more our hearts are refined, the more likely we're going to hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant. So why do we serve one another? Is it to be nice? Or is it because there's a greater plan at place? I charge you in the presence of Elohim, who gives life to all things, and of Messiah Yeshua, who in his testimony before Pontius Pilate made the good confession, i.e., even on the pain of death, in the greatest trial that Messiah would go through, he chose what was eternal. He was willing to pay the ultimate price in the ultimate toiling, right? That for the greater good of the plan of redemption, to keep the commandment unstained and free from reproach until the appearing of our Master Yeshua Messiah, which he will display at his appointed times. Now, this is one of the places where I've put what the Greek actually is probably hinting at. If you have an English translation, it will probably say at the proper time or at the same time. I actually looked at the Greek in this, and it can be translated which he will display at the appointed times or at his appointed times. The appointed times in the Greek is actually in the plural. So when you see in the English translation, at the proper time, that's not what the Greek says. The Greek is actually in the plural form. Well, what are the set or proper times? It's the appointed times. Paul understood how critical the appointed times are. What he's saying right now is within the appointed times model, within the appointed times framework. So when he's saying, fight the good fight, take hold of the eternal life to which you were called, make the good confession of the faith, pursue what is eternal, pursue that which will transcend the time domain, even under the pain of death, even when things get tough. Pursue these things. Why? Because Elohim is going to display certain things at the appointed times. I believe there's actually a hint here of the judgment seat of Messiah. We're going to see at the appointed times a group of people that will have the word said to them, well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of the master. A bride will be lifted up in front of the nations, and Yah will say, she is my bride, she is worthy to govern with me for the next 1,000 years. All of this will be revealed at his appointed times. He will rule and reign. He will have a bride beside him. And that bride will be there because she toiled and she helped one another toil because of what toiling does. Who alone has immortality, who dwells in an unapproachable light, whom no one has ever seen or can see. Him be honor and eternal dominion. Amen. And what I love about these words is that we know in Revelation it says, to he who overcomes, they shall see Elohim face to face. There's a beautiful mystery there as to the beauty of this plan of redemption and what Yah is really wanting to do. We're actually starting to see his heart's desire in these words. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on Elohim, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. So again, the issue is not about being rich. It's just, what are you doing with it? There's a really interesting statement in the book of Deuteronomy that says, I'm going to paraphrase it, that it is the warning in the Torah is, when you come into the land, do not get pride and puffed up that you say, by the power of my hand, I have amassed all these things. And then it goes on to say, but it is Yah your Elohim who gives you the blessing and the abundant riches to establish his covenant, which he made to your father, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. And you can read that two ways because, yes, he fulfilled his word to his people to honor the promise he made to Abraham. But a reading that people often do not see is that Yah gives us riches so that we can be the agents through which he's using to establish his covenant here on earth. Which makes a lot of sense as to why Paul would say, as we've read today, don't undercut your brother in business. Because when you do that, you're literally undermining the promise that Yah says, I'm richly blessing you so that I can establish my covenant, so that I can establish my people. Again, what Paul is saying is pointing us right back to Torah. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. Thus, now listen to this, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. Again, we are not living right now. This is just a test. Life is yet to come. And so again, Paul is literally, he's actually hinting here at Yeshua's words, right? Do not store up for yourselves treasure here on earth where moth and rust do destroy, but store yourselves treasure in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy, because where your treasure is, there your heart is also. That which you desire, love. And so what we do in this time domain has the potential to store up a good foundation for the future. Think rewards at his coming judgment. Well done, good and faithful servant. You were trustworthy with the little, which is what we've been entrusted to now. I've put here, though, that good foundation, it's actually built through toil. You know, in this particular passage, if you've toiled and you've amassed wealth, bless other people with it. Bless your families. Don't be tight-fisted. But also, what about the toil that we do in working as a body together, the giving up of your time to hear a brother or sister out, the giving up of your time to serve into one another? Is that not toil as well? Of course it is. That good foundation for the age to come is built through toil. Toil will refine your heart. It will refine your character. It will help you through the sanctification process. And so then that beckons the question, what will ultimately leave this time domain? Because your flesh isn't going to inherit the kingdom. Flesh and blood does not inherit the kingdom. Everything that is temporary will be gone. And when we go into the eternal. So what is leaving this time domain? Hopefully, a circumcised heart. How is it circumcised? Through crushing, through the crushing of the grapes, the crushing of the oils, through toil. Again, let's remember that toil is not just how much money you've got in your bank account. What about the emotional toil of providing emotionally, husbands, wives, the toil physically of providing physically, providing emotionally, providing spiritually. Remember that the promise of toil to eat bread by the sweat of our brow, yes, there's the physical aspect, but what about the spiritual aspect? If you want the bread of life, it's going to come with toil. What is going to leave this time domain? I'll say it again, as temporary as this time domain is, it stands to have great value because of what could come out of it. O Timothy, guard the deposit entrusted to you. Like, it's interesting because we're told that we've been given a earnest or deposit of the Spirit. And Paul is saying, guard it. Guard your heart. Guard that which has been entrusted to you. Guard the deposit. Also think of, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been trustworthy with the little. Now let me trust you with much. I believe what Paul is saying to Timothy is, Timothy, you're guarding the little right now. Guard it. Because if you do well with this little now, you will be given much in the age to come. The eternal perspective is woven all throughout chapter 6. Avoid the irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge. For by professing it, some have swerved from the faith. Grace be with you. And so Paul closes, this is the final passage of this book of 1 Timothy. He closes the letter exactly where he begun, with warnings of those that will come in with irreverent babble and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge. Look at this, irreverent. We've seen throughout this series that Paul urges people to godliness or reverence, the fear of Yah. And he's saying, avoid those that through their speech and actions and contradictions show that they do not fear Yah. They're irreverent. And they will profess to the faith, but they've actually swerved from it. Paul opens and closes his letter to Timothy with the same warning. It must be really important. So what was the warning? Where we started. As I urged you when I was going to Macedonia, remain at Ephesus, so that you may charge certain persons not to teach any different doctrine, nor to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies, which promote speculations or divisions or arguments, rather than the stewardship from Elohim that is by faith. And we saw that this word stewardship in the Greek, oikodomia, literally means the building up of the house. And the warning was, there's going to be people that are going to come in professing the faith, having all kinds of Torah and scriptural knowledge, and all they do is cause divisions, arguments, and what they do, they shipwreck people's faith, and thus they prevent the building up of the house that Elohim is trying to do through his people. And so Paul, we started the series here. Paul started his letter here, and he's just finished it right here at the end of 1 Timothy 6. He's reminding him, Timothy, watch out. So Paul's finished with an eternal perspective, and Paul is reminding Timothy, now that I've given you this eternal perspective, remember, Timothy, what's going to try and hijack you earning your rewards and other people attaining this eternal the rewards of the judgment seat of Messiah. These are the people that are going to hijack the whole process. If you entertain these people, you are literally robbing yourself and others of their the rewards that they stand to gain at the judgment seat of Messiah. Or to put it really bluntly, blood will be on your hands. Blood. The aim of this command, what command? To avoid all this stuff, is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith, a faith without hypocrisy. This is the goal of avoiding this stuff. And again, notice, what have I been saying over and over again today? What is going to exit the time domain? A pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. That is what is going to exit out the time domain. And these people that Paul is warning at the start and at the end of the letter, they're going to hijack the whole process. Wolves in sheep's clothing. This is how critical it is. So, we're going to do a very quick recap of 1 Timothy, because like I said when introducing, we've been looking at it one chapter a week, and as a result of that, we've been able to get into great detail. Well, a fair amount of detail. I could have doubled the length of the series, but hey. But because we zone in on one chapter, we kind of lose the bird's eye perspective. And so in part one is essentially the universal problem in the faith. It was the problem back in the days of Paul and the apostles. It's still the problem now, that there will be those that cause divisions in the body, and they will come from within, that have a form of godliness but deny its power. Thus, they're essentially hypocrites. They will desire to be teachers of the Torah or of the Bible, but ultimately they will shipwreck the faith of others. And as a result, they may find themselves handed over to Satan. If they're part of an assembly where there's good biblical authority, good leadership will remove them from the body and hand them over to their own desires so that Yah can deal with them. And so essentially, Paul understood that Timothy was a child of the true faith, which was founded in discipleship, okay? And Paul is saying to Timothy, Timothy, I know you're a true child of the faith. I've tested you in discipleship. To the point that I've been able to discern that I'm willing to lay hands on you, Timothy. The eldership is willing to lay hands on you. Go and serve. Heads up, Timothy, this is the problem you're going to have to contend with. These people that come from within. And this is the universal problem. It was happening back then. It was happening before. It's happening now. He then went on to say, essentially, what is the root of this universal problem? And how will it manifest? What is the universal problem? These people will come in, causing all kinds of problems, teaching wonky doctrines, using the script to do so. They will cause divisions, dissensions. And essentially, where does this come from? And so Paul goes right back to the garden. He goes right back to the garden. And so in understanding this problem, because again, Paul knows that Timothy is going to encounter the same problem over and over again. But when you've got a spiritual problem, what tends to happen is that it can manifest itself different ways. And Paul is literally just saying, go back to the garden. If you understand the garden, you will start to see it everywhere, this universal problem. And at the heart of it is usurping and not understanding the design of men and women, not only within the physical sense, but within the weightier matter. How we go about our faith is to be a witness to those within the camp, but also to those outside. And this actually comes about by cleaning the inside of the cup. These people from causing all these problems, remember, they focus on the outside of the cup. We saw that our prayers are hindered when in a state of quarreling and division. This is why we've got to be careful to not bring this stuff in, because it literally affects our relationship with our Creator. Paul clearly laid out the design of men and women and used the garden and the fall of man as its foundation. And as a result, women were not to teach at the assembly level, but they're to teach the less spiritually mature women and the children. But essentially, the bird's eye view, chapter 1, there's a problem. Chapter 2, let me tell you, Timothy, where this problem first came about, because when you understand that, you will see it manifest. And when you see these manifestations within the body that you're dealing with, know where it's coming from. You've got someone usurping and not listening to the voice of their groom. And they're listening to another voice and thinking, I know better. Pride of life, right? The fruit was good to the eyes, good for food, and good to make one wise. Lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life. So chapter 1, there's a problem that you're going to deal with. Chapter 2, let me tell you where this problem came about from and how it will manifest. Chapter 3, now we know the problem, let's serve. However, there's requirements for those that want to serve. Those that are going to serve, they need to know the garden and the fall of man. And I mean truly understand what went down, not this religious modern Catholic version that's being given to the vast proportions of the body. You need to know what's going on. The traditions of women or women, right? We need to leave them behind, because we saw Eve added to the command and the enemy was able to use that as a way of deception. Leave this stuff behind if you're going to serve. Serving is a noble and precious task, but it will come at a great cost. A great cost. Those that serve need to be tested by the long game, as I used. There were clear guidelines given for the requirements for those that wish to serve, as they will be imitated as they imitate Messiah. And ultimately will Messiah shine forth from us. So part 1, there's a problem. Part 2, know where the problem came from. Part 3, now we know the problem, let's serve. However, if you want to serve, know these things. Chapter 4. These things right here will keep those who serve on the narrow path. So, false teachers will focus on the outside of the cup, but they'll have no real fruit. So they'll say the right things, they'll look the right way, they'll sound the right way, but ultimately, it's all outside of the cup. The inside is still filled with dead bones. They will use the quote-unquote supernatural as a form of authority, dreams, visions, and all that kind of stuff. They'll use it as a form of authority, and they'll use subjective emotions, both their own and the unsuspecting, to validate their authority. I had a dream. I had a vision. I went to heaven. I went to hell. Do you now feel it in your spirit? They will add and take away from the word and replace it with the traditions of men. Again, taking us back to the garden. And as a result, the little ones will not be spared because they do not know any better. Those that do have gifts, you need to work and hone your gifts. How? Toil. Toil, serving. This is how my line of sight and the gifts that Yah has given me have grown and grown over the years, because I've toiled on a spiritual level in serving the body. We looked at prophecy and the laying on of hands, playing the long game. This is where prophecy, discerning, weighing someone in the balance and going, should I lay hands on them or should I not? So, part 1, there's a problem. Part 2, where did the problem start and what does it look like? Part 3, the problem, let's serve. However, there's requirements of those that serve. Part 4, as you serve, just remember these things because it will help you stay on this narrow path of servitude. Part 5, as you continue to serve, remember these things. That we're to do everything we can to build up the family unit at every level. Everything we do needs to be building up husbands, wives, families. Because remember that the family is a typology of the body of Messiah. And if someone can get a good family unit going, well, ramp that up to the weightier matter, then they can serve at the body level. Both men and women were to provide for their families. It's our toil in this time domain. Doing so will show that we fear Elohim, and it will be for our benefit. If we don't do this, we're hypocrites. We deny the faith, and the Romans are better than us. If we do not provide for our families and for one another, we will struggle with our toil, hence why we need discipleship. And discipleship is there to equip each other in the true faith, to equip one another so that we can walk through our journey of toil, so that we can build that foundation which is for the life to come. Let's remember that authority structure in the body was, has, and will always be the same. And that if we do not do things his way, we will pay consequences. There are consequences to not doing things his way. So, part 1, there's a problem. Part 2, know where the problem came from. Part 3, now we know the problem, let's serve. However, there's requirements for serving. Part 4, these things will keep those who serve on the narrow path. And as you serve, also remember these things. And today, eyes on the prize. Eyes on the prize. This is why we even do these things. All of these commands and regulations and things that Paul is laying down that come from the Torah, it's to help us attain the prize, which is eternal life and hopefully the ability to serve in the age to come. How we deal with authority in this age will be a witness of his word and character. And how we deal with authority in this age will be a barometer of how we deal with the ultimate authority, which is Yah himself. Paul closed his letter how he started it. Warning, there's a problem. And so we go around and round the loop, right? There's a warning. There's a problem. Where does this problem come from? Now we know the problem, right? On and on and on. Only one thing is coming out of this time domain. Only one thing. And that is a heart refined and perfected by toil. That is the only thing. Hopefully, there's the covenant of a groom written on that heart. But the only way you're going to grow into the fullness of the character of Messiah, the only way you're going to grow in the gifts of Messiah, and things like prophecy, and also the ministerial gifts, the only way you're going to grow in them, toil. What or who do we long and yearn for? Are we of this world? Are we of this cosmos? Because we're in it, but are we of it? Ultimately, there will be a judgment. Eyes on the prize. Amen?